a lot of people talk about, World War III, Ukraine, and all these different things. But for me, it's world government. It's easier to control 10 super countries than 200 little countries, right? And so I feel that's the direction we're going, and it's going to be digital tyranny. I view basically the social credit system, the algorithm ghetto, as the mark of the beast system, where it's not so much, the point is not some physical mark, it's the system is set up, and then it's like if you're going to submit to it or not. I think our duty is to resist evil as best as we can, but not be obsessed about it. I'm the kind of person where if I'm taken to the gulags, I'll be laughing on my way.
Welcome to the Staying Free podcast. I hope you all had a good Christmas and New Year. So I'm back here with my first episode of 2023 after taking a break for a few weeks since my Christmas special episode. And over the Christmas break, I got in touch with Hrvoje Morić of the Geopolitics Empire podcast. And we realized that we were both going to be in Puerto Vallarta at the same time. That's where I live. And he was coming here on vacation. So we decided that we'd get together and do an in-person interview. So as I said, Hrvoje is the host of the Geopolitics Empire podcast. And there he conducts interviews with everyone from government officials, economists, academics, scientists, journalists, and freedom fighters from all over the world, delving into the historical, economic, and cultural forces that drive global politics and the pursuit of power. So Hrvoje's been on my radar for a little while. We've been following each other on Twitter, and I'd seen a couple of episodes of the Geopolitics Empire podcast, but it wasn't until my friend and previous guest, Parallel Mike, went on his podcast that I started really delving into the backlog of episodes. And since then, it's become one of my favorite podcasts. I think the content is great, the guests are fantastic, and Hrvoje really brings a lot of his own historical knowledge to it as well. So I hope you enjoy this one. If you do, please give it a like and a share on social media. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please give it a 5-star rating in whichever podcast app you're using. If you're new here, then welcome. Make sure you give the podcast a subscribe for future episodes. If you'd like to donate to the podcast, you can do that in 2 ways. First is you can give a Bitcoin tip, that's on-chain and via Lightning Network. You can also buy me a coffee. The links to those are in the description. And finally, I really want to encourage all my listeners to go and listen to the podcast on the Fountain app. Fountain will allow you to load a wallet with Bitcoin on the Lightning Network and then stream sats as you're listening to the podcast. This is a great way to get away from the major platforms and also to help support the podcast by sending micropayments. It also encourages me to continue hosting good quality conversations that you're willing to not only tune in for, but also stream sats and help support. If you're already listening on Fountain or any other Podcasting 2.0 platform, then thank you for streaming sats. It's hugely appreciated, as are all the other donations that I receive. All right, onto the episode. Welcome, guys. So today we're doing something completely different again, just like last one where I had multiple different people. Today I'm doing my first live in-person conversation. So here I've got with me Hrvoje from the Geopolitics and Empire podcast, and we're going to just talk about a bunch of different stuff. We're in Puerto Vallarta together, so we thought that while we're both here, we'll do a episode together. So welcome to the podcast.
It's awesome to be here. You gave away our secret location.
I did. Oh shit! Have I just doxed you?
No, I'm just joking.
Okay. Anyway, he's in Puerto Vallarta visiting right now. You're just on vacation here, right?
Yeah, just vacationing. That's what we do in Mexico. Just taking it easy.
Yeah, exactly right. So anyway, but normally you live in Guadalajara. So I know that we've already discussed some of this like before coming here and actually starting the recording. So feel free to go over stuff we've already covered, because I've kind of made this mistake of having a bunch of really interesting conversation before we even get the thing going. So feel free to kind of repeat anything. But tell everyone just a little bit about like how you kind of came to be where you are today. I know that you're Croatian, right? You were born in Croatia.
No, US.
Yeah. Oh, you were born in the US. Yeah. Okay, so let's start right back there. So let's have a kind of a run through of your life up until now.
Yeah, real quick. So I'm born in Chicago, US, American, but ethnically a Croat. My parents are immigrants. And so I grew up between both worlds. We'd move back and forth. When I was in 5th grade, we moved to Split during the tail end of the war in '94 to Croatia, then moved back. I went to high school in Croatia. And so I identify most as a Croatian. It's like a Mexican born in the US who speaks Spanish and eats Mexican food, and they're Mexican, right? First, and then I studied history, And then in the early 2000s, I just decided I wanted to leave the United States. Because kind of like you, I like living in the developing world. I want to see the world, experience different cultures, learn languages. But I didn't like this super consumerism, materialism. And everyone around me in the 2000s in the U.S., they just want to get drunk, be promiscuous, and I'm like, I wanted to find God. I was just more spiritual. And I didn't like that temptation around me of just going to the bars, and everyone's just talking about sports and trivial things. And so my ticket out was Peace Corps Mongolia. So I lived in the yurt in the Gobi Desert, and I was also studying about 9/11 and America as an empire. For me, it dawned on me late. I realized we're an empire. We're not just a country. And so I just wanted out, and then since 2006, I just never looked back. I sort of permanently expatriated from the United States, went to Mongolia, came back briefly. And then deciding what I'd do next, which was studying at the Geneva School of Diplomacy, a master in international relations. And there I had professors like Saddam Hussein's defense lawyer, Curtis Dobler, Alfred de Zayas, who's the great-grandson of Cuba's president and UN special rapporteur, who's often on Russia Today and other places, and folks like this. And then once I graduated in 2009, I was in my home in Croatia. I'm like, I was applying for jobs, Alaska, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Mongolia, and I ended up here in Mexico. I got offered, and I didn't want to, because when I was learning about deep politics and the deep state, I didn't want to corrupt myself, working in government or international organizations. I'm not a fan of the UN. That's the globalist, world government. So I'm like, I can't stand being there. And so I thought, teaching is an innocent career. You can teach the youth. It's an honest job. And so I got offered to teach the Tec de Monterrey. It's like the MIT of Mexico, although it's very globalist. During the pandemic, they had actually Hillary Clinton and Bill Gates speak at the online graduation ceremonies. And so, I've been here since 2010. Maybe like you, I thought I'd come here. It's warm. I want to learn Spanish. The food is good. Pretty women, right? And so I ended up becoming a Mexican. 2018, I was naturalized as a proud Mexican citizen. So I got 3 passports now. And then I went off to Kazakhstan. I got offered the gig to teach because I love Central Asia. Like I was in Mongolia. And so from 2017 to 2021, I taught in Kazakhstan. And then all hell broke loose with COVID-19 84, right?
What were you actually teaching?
Well, since 2010, I am a history major and international relations. So the whole time I've been teaching history and political science, as well as economics. So given, the way that you kind of see the world and talk about the world now and the stuff that you talk about on your podcast, you must have been a complete renegade, like teaching this kind of stuff, were you? Or did you have to kind of conform to what they were talking about? No, I've always been a renegade. So always teaching politically incorrectly. So in Mexico, I got so I taught at the high school level. That was always my first full-time job because it's harder to get fired as a high school teacher. And then I was an adjunct at the same time, adjunct professor of international relations. So in Mexico, I taught different courses, but one of them was North American scenarios, basically Canada, US, and Mexican politics. And I taught that for I don't know how many semesters. And you'd always get different department directors and whatnot. And like I said, it's a very globalist school. And inexplicably, one semester, I didn't get assigned that course. I didn't get any courses. There was a new department director. And I was sort of told by someone in the administration who was friendly with me, the department head didn't like how you were teaching. So I felt like I was being censored. They took away my courses. And they gave it to a local teacher. And I heard later from students, they hated the way this teacher was teaching them at the university level as if they were high school students. And I was Skyping in the father of the North American Union, Robert Pastor. We had the last interview with him. I Skyped him into the class. I mean, I was using, because these North American scenarios. I'm Skyping in Paul Craig Roberts, Ray McGovern, former CIA. I'm like, who doesn't like John Perkins? I Skyped him into my classes. And so, yeah, they took away my classes. And so I would always I had a parent, American student. And I was teaching how U.S. was funding ISIS and the American government killed Martin Luther King. And his mom sends in the letter to my principal saying, this teacher's a anti-American conspiracy theorist. And I'm like, Coretta Scott King, the whole King family says the government killed him. They did a court case, and the verdict actually says local, state, and federal U.S. government agencies, literally this is what it says, participated in the conspiracy to assassinate Martin Luther King. So yeah, I've always been kicking against the pricks, so to speak.
Right, okay, yeah. And, you said, just kind of rewinding a bit before you were teaching and stuff, you kind of moved around the world and, lived in different countries. And, what is it that attracts you to doing that kind of thing? Because, certainly like for me, obviously we're both living in Mexico now. We both kind of like seem to have a love for similar reasons of this country. And I'm interested to know kind of your story there, because I think most people, especially who were born in America, they normally don't like have such a thirst for travel and living in different places. Normally they're quite American centric. So you've definitely kind of really pushed the boat out there in terms of like where you've been and traveled to in the world and lived. So where does that come from you?
Well, I think in one sense, as a Croat, Croatians are pretty nomadic. I've got family that lives all across the planet. So we are kind of nomads, but on the other hand, I guess I just wanted to, I think it's just more intellectual thing and curiosity, and I want to know the world. I want to know other cultures. I want to learn languages. And then I've never been the kind of person I don't like going somewhere for a week or two, like to another country. For me, I want to go there for a month or months or a year, because I want to absorb the local culture, and I want to see through the eyes, see how the people in that country see the world. And someone told me that when I was in Peace Corps, we had a great instructor. He was a Greek American. He said, you don't know your own country until you've lived outside of it and looked at it from the outside. And that's so true for so many Americans. They're so brainwashed. They live in a bubble, and it's like they're so arrogant and they're so hateful towards the rest of the world. And they think every other country is just trash or garbage. And of course there's problems everywhere, but this having this attitude is like not helpful at all. I don't think it's loving. It's just this exceptionalism. There are things, probably Mexicans should strive for that are done in America well. But there are things that Mexicans do better that Americans should also strive for. This more authenticity, right? This social aspect, this familial aspect, where in America, families are just broken up, right? And everyone's on some kind of legal or illegal drug. And so, I wanted to see the world, so.
Okay, so you've kind of left America and you've gone around, you've done the teaching and all kinds of different things. At what point during this whole journey for you did you kind of become, for lack of a better term, red pilled, about the nature of the world and stuff? Because obviously you've ended up in Mexico, and a lot of people now are coming here, like we both know from being here, like there's a lot of people who are coming into Mexico now, from different countries, because they're seeking, more freedom in their life, especially from like Canada and places like this that have kind of gone, full kind of totalitarian. But you were here, you've been here 10 years, right? So you've been here quite a long time. Like, why did you choose Mexico? And was that kind of like, was it on a basis of searching for more freedom? And if not, then when did that kind of search for freedom and things kind of begin for you?
Well, I sort of went down the rabbit hole in the 2000s, like I said, 9/11, when I learned 9/11 was a false flag operation, if you ask me. And I don't think anyone else is innocent. Like the 1999 Moscow apartment bombings in Russia, like 4 apartments went down. I think that was the Russian state terrorism, a Russian false flag. It's just not like I think anyone, this is just, a matter of fact. Governments do this. And so, but even in 2010, I was consciously thinking of this as well when I came to Mexico. I felt freer. There's pluses and minuses to everything. There's more order in the US, but more control of the government. there's more disorder in Mexico because the government has less control, but in that sense, you have more freedom. So I'm not a libertarian. I'm libertarian-ish. I like a number of principles, just this general direction towards holding liberty and freedom up. And so that's one thing I enjoyed about coming from the U.S. to Mexico early on in 2010 was just having more, just being sort of left alone by the government. And, you know, I'm a Christian. You could even call me a fundamentalist Christian. I believe in the Bible. And one of the things that, for me, puts a lot of these things together is the prophecy aspect. You know, there's all the prophecy about a one world government and one world currency that it's implied it's going to be basically a global dystopia, like a global dictatorship. And you're sort of seeing, you know, even for people who don't believe in that are saying like, yeah, we're kind of seeing this global, you know, one world type of thing.
Interesting. Did you happen to catch my conversation with Rick Munn on my pod?
No, I haven't.
We talked specifically about this. So we basically just went down this rabbit hole for like probably over an hour and a half, like on this specific thing. So like if you guys haven't already listened to that episode and you want to know more about this, like Rick really lays that whole thing out. And I do think that I'm kind of starting to see it. You know, I wouldn't say that I'm like a very religious person, never really like have been, but I do think that there is some kind of like, there is some fundamental truth there. I think that anything that lasts so long as something like the Bible, you know, being presumably the most read book in the world and, you know, one of the longest lasting in the world, there's always going to be some inherent truth there. I don't know whether I would go as far as, you know, to believe the nature of the prophecies, but maybe there's some kind of inherent truths about the nature of the human condition, which are kind of expressed in there, which, you know, you can kind of see happening over and over again. Like, I guess the way I see it is like, maybe we all have, you know, darkness inside of it. We all want to control people. We all, you know, to some degree, and that the more power, you know, that whole idea of like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Maybe these are just inherent truths, and the Bible did a really, really good job of kind of depicting that. I'm not sure that I'm totally on, you know, on the prophecy side of things yet, but I wouldn't rule it out at this point. You know, like I certainly think that I've become close to it. Like I've started reading the Bible and stuff. So, you know, I'm open to exploring that avenue. And, you know, maybe if I learn more about it, I will see that the parallels are more than just, I guess, metaphorically parallel, maybe literally parallel as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying that, I mean, this is what I believe. Like, well, for me, the first red pill was reading the Bible at age 17, because I was raised Catholic, and then I realized I became a non-denominational Christian, because when you read the Bible, you realize it's opposed to a lot of what Catholic Church says. So I'm like, I'm not Catholic anymore. And I kind of went through everything again, atheism and Hinduism and all the other isms and the occult I studied. I just came back to not, you know, just the Bible. And for me, a lot of the prophecies are very specific. You know, the creation of Israel again in 1948, and then you realize there's never been a people group that's been wiped from the face of the earth, and then come back and their language, and just, you know, many other things. So yeah, it was that, you know, the Bible first, and then 9/11, and then learning about how the World Federal Reserve. I had the privilege in 2011 of being taken out to dinner by G. Edward Griffin, you know, the author of Creature from Jekyll Island. Right. Because I when I was in Geneva, I was just all into this stuff, and he was looking for volunteers for his unfiltered news letter at the time, and I was for a couple of years just working with his team, and then I just happened to be going out to LA in 2011. I went to go see a Soundgarden concert, and he's based in LA, and I just wanted to meet with his assistant, who I've been chatting with the whole time, and he's like, "Hey, Ed wants to take you to lunch," and so yeah, I got to, you know, go meet all these interesting people. So
okay, I want to come back to that, because I do want to talk to you about money and economics, but just before I do, I want to pick up on something you said before, because you said that you're not a libertarian. What are your views on that kind of stuff? You know, I'm not necessarily telling, you know, I don't want to kind of like you to put everything in a box here necessarily, but like, what are your like more general beliefs? Because I think that I certainly would describe myself as a libertarian. I'm not sure whether I would go like full voluntarist, anarchist. Like I kind of, at this stage, I think that if we could get to some kind of minarchism with absolute minimum government, like that's certainly way better than where we are now, obviously. But I want to know where you are on that spectrum.
Well, like I said, it goes back to be for the spiritual. And so I think the problem with, and libertarian, there's a lot of libertarians that I've talked to that I've had on my TNT show, right? TNT, or my Geopolitics
Yeah,
Empire.
we'll go into that as well.
My Geopolitics Empire podcast, who are leaving libertarianism, like Mark Clare, Buck Johnson, who I've interviewed. And I've met them a year ago here in Sayulita. It's like, Sayulita is like, what, a half hour from here, where we are. There was a conference last year. And it's funny, a lot of them, this is interesting, a lot of these people are moving to Orthodox Christianity or Christianity. So you're seeing people, again, who were not religious, because there's just so much darkness going on that there's no way to explain what's going on unless you bring in the metaphysical or spiritual, right, dimension. And so the beef I have with libertarianism is because it's almost, there's no limit. It's to having this freedom where at some point it clashes with my Christian perspective.
Why does it clash? I'm interested to know this, because I find that a lot of people are where you are on this, is that maybe it's coincidental, but at a similar time than that they're kind of leaving behind libertarian beliefs, they seem to kind of go into Orthodox Christianity. But I don't necessarily see why the two are kind of mutually exclusive. So maybe you can lay that out for me.
Well, I mean, my other point is, from a Christian view, I don't necessarily care for any political system. Like, if you look at Christ, he said, tomorrow I could snap my fingers and have all the angels destroy the Roman Empire. So the Christian purpose, hence my sort of focus, is not so much the political, where and when I can, right? Like what we're doing with our podcast, resist tyranny, but that's not like my biggest preoccupation. It's more the spiritual war on the individual level and with others. And it really doesn't matter what regime you live under. We live under empires and I would say republic. Like the U.S. republic is probably, the republic is the best form of government because it's the smallest. It's like next to anarchy. You have anarchy and then republic, as the U.S. founders talked about. The smallest government possible, where you maintain enough order, protect people from killing each other. And then from there you have like a democracy, and then monarchy, communism, statism. You go on that spectrum. So I like the smallest government possible. But as a Croatian, I was talking to someone in Croatia last year. It's like a few days ago, we dropped our national currency, the kuna. We took the euro, where a lot of people from Croatia call the European Union Euroslavia, like Yugoslavia. So, we were free from Yugoslavia for 10, 20 years, and then we joined again this globalist communist system. But before that, we were part of the kingdom, a kingdom of the Slovenes, Serbs, and Croats. And then we were under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And then before, we were under other empires and the Roman Empire. And it's just like, you know what I'm saying? You just get used to living whatever political system you're under. And with libertarianism, they might say if homosexual marriage, which I don't agree with, well, the term marriage, if people want to do whatever they want, if you look at all of history, there was always, homosexuals and they were doing what they wanted to do. You do that in your private, it's a sexual thing, a preference. But then, marriage, that's man and woman, they're usurping this sort of institution. So I know with libertarianism, I think they might go too far in allowing or legalizing some things that I think if you look historically, traditionally, were not legalized. Maybe they were done in private, which, you can do whatever you want in private. I don't care, But now you're sort of... what used to be traditional cultural mores, maybe cultural buffer that we had, might be taken down in some things, like with libertarianism. Like if you go to Kazakhstan, where I used to live, or even Mexico, there are some cultural taboos, where the society or culture says we're not going to accept this.
Yeah, I think I understand where you're coming from. So basically, there are some things which you think should be prohibited, and therefore you need some kind of institution to act as a prohibitive force for those things, right? Have I kind of
Yeah, like a buffer, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a law. Maybe because in many respects, the society itself.
Yeah, but that's where I was going to go with this, right? Is that like I don't see why because for me, like as a libertarian, like I think that the institution of marriage, I would say that you either have it available to anyone, no matter how you determine what your marriage should be. Or better still, it's not even a recognized state institution, whatever. And, if people want to, have some kind of private arrangement, and, I kind of, in many cases, you might agree with this, like it's a sacrament. For me, it's not even any kind of duty of the state. It's depending upon what your religion is. So if you're a Christian, you will have a Christian marriage and it's all dealt with by the church. I don't think that or if you're having, a Hindu marriage or whatever, it's dealt with by that religious institution. I don't think it should be in any way a government institution whatsoever. So I would come back to just saying, like, even if you are going down the Orthodox Christianity line of things, why not just say, well, I want more power to be awarded back to the religious institutions, which has actually been siphoned to government? I would say that, if anything, that would push me more down the libertarian route, by that reasoning.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think so much about libertarianism these days, or these philosophical aspects, but I just feel like it's very disingenuous. I mean, when it comes to this stuff, what they're trying to do, where it's like marriage has always been a man and a woman type of thing, and I mean, for the longest time, it's been a legal device, right? People legally get married before the state or empire, in all of history, plus, in the church or not. And so it's this thing where they're preaching tolerance, the whole LGBT, now trans movement, where they're being disingenuous because it's a zero-sum game. It's not like where you can have both. You can't. It's either the old, man and woman marriage, or once you invert that, now you're seeing teachers all over the place, people being fired because they won't use pronouns. Like in Ireland, I'm reading, and in my own home, there was a history teacher in Illinois just losing the job because they refuse to use. So what you know what I'm saying? Like that's sort of my beef. And then why would you have a need if you're LGBT or whatever? This is what these people have been doing. Let's say the heterosexuals, that's their thing. Why do I have to go and copy them? I just do my own thing, or we as well. We don't have to. You can just live together or whatever. Maybe if you want a tax break, get some tax break. But
yeah, see, this is the thing. Like, I would go as far as to say, like, there shouldn't necessarily be a tax break or a tax incentive for these things, because again, we're taking something that is supposed to be a sacrament, and we're kind of putting it into the realm of the state. So it's like, if you want to get married, have a Christian, man and woman wedding and live together, etc. Like, then you do that based upon the economics of the free market, which says, okay, well, I want to live together with this person. It makes sense economically. I want to raise children with them, etc. Or if you want to, be in a gay marriage and you want to do that same thing, I kind of think that the state should be agnostic on all of this stuff. And I also think that, given where we are, obviously I'm picking up here, by the way, on a point of disagreement that we have, because we obviously agree on a lot. So it's fun to tease these things out. But, I would say that with the, I'm losing my train of thought a little bit, but with where was I going with that point?
We're getting away from the state, I guess. Well, I would just add that I actually practice that. Like, my wife's not a U.S. citizen, and when I file my report, tax report, I probably could put as like dependents, or do some sort of thing where I get some benefit. But my approach is exactly this. Like, I don't want nothing to do with the government. I don't want them to give me money or any break. I just want them to leave me alone. And I choose the option where my wife, because she's not a U.S. citizen, she doesn't have to do anything. But there's the other option where I like file jointly or something, and then she'll get some, I don't know, deductions or benefits or something. But then she has to provide, I don't know, her bank accounts and all of this stuff. And I'm like, I would rather get nothing from you, government, but I get more privacy and you leave me alone. You get what I'm saying? So
I agree completely. I agree completely. But actually, where I was going to go with that point as well is, one of the problems that I have with, I guess, kind of, because I hear this with a lot of like conservatives who dislike libertarians. A good example is Matt Walsh. I listened to his podcast, and I think that I agree with him on many things, but he doesn't like libertarians, and he's always kind of like, trying to dunk on libertarians. And I kind of think, if the state was going to bring about the kind of moral, the state of morality, which you hoped it would have brought it around, because we've never had more government, and we've never had, in his view, according to him, I'm not necessarily agreeing or disagreeing, there is more immorality, right? According to him, we shouldn't have sex transitions for kids. We shouldn't have, he doesn't believe in gay marriage and this kind of stuff. He doesn't believe in, having the idea of multiple genders. I mean, all of this has happened under extreme statism. So I kind of think that like the more you go away from that, the more likely it is that society will organize itself according to kind of more decentralized principles. And one of those decentralized principles would be like, I guess, religious ones, right? Obviously, you want to say decentralized, like just meaning like there's lots of religions. Like in one country, there's one government with many rules, like with kind of federal laws, etc. But when it comes down to, communities, they can all be within different religions. And I kind of think that if you got rid of the state, you would probably be more likely to have that fractionalization, where that you could live in communities which would govern things according to kind of more Christian orthodoxy or, Judaism or whatever it is. So I guess, I'm not trying to pull you back to becoming a libertarian, although I am, I guess. But, I do think that there's no, from what I see, I don't see any reason to move away from libertarianism, in order to have more of a kind of religious orientated societal structure.
Yeah, well, I would just say I've never been a libertarian. I don't even I'm not a Republican, let's say. I just classify myself more on a cultural, social, spiritual level, that I'm a conservative Christian.
Yeah.
But politically, I kind of don't. I was living in Kazakhstan, and that's an authoritarian light regime, and I can live fine there, or in Mongolia, it's a democracy, but it's almost like anarchy, because it's got the lowest population density, and you can just go live out in the Gobi. There's literally nothing there, and no one bothers you. It's like you're literally living in anarchy. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, and I have on a lot of libertarians. I try to find what I have in common with people. And I focus on those things more rather than the things that we don't have in common. Like when I have guests, I had on a guest just that comes to mind. I'll have guests on that are leftists, that are very good on foreign policy or imperialism, or this monopoly capitalist crazy system, but they believe in like climate change, and it's like they might mention it in passing during the interview, but I kind of like pretend like they never mentioned it, and we just continue talking about foreign policy, where I find it more valuable to beat on these things where because then we would just be arguing about climate change.
Fair enough.
No, but that's just my approach. So I interviewed Scott Horton, Spike Cohen, a lot of the antiwar.com crew, and we talk about a lot of the things that we have in common, but I just don't have, as some people maybe in the independent media or whatever you want to call it, people out there may be attached to a political system or category. I just kind of find that a little less relevant. You live under whatever system you live under, and you just try to go about your interests, right? Whatever they are. I mean, look here we are in Mexico. How would you describe Mexico? I mean, it is kind of like anarchy. It's like a failed state. And you just go about doing what you want to do. If you're, super Catholic, you go, do that. If you're libertarian, you just forget the state. You just do whatever it is you want to do. But sometimes you do have to comply to the requirements of the state.
Yeah, okay. Let's move on to that, because I know I said to you before this, I was like, I don't want to put you in a political box, but I then tried to force you to force you to admit you're a libertarian. So let's. I want to talk a bit about the Mexican stuff, actually, because this is something that actually a lot of people kind of ask me about privately, and they talk to me about what's it like in Mexico and what's going on there. I've had some people who listen to the podcast and some friends and people on Twitter and stuff who now have either got residencies or they're thinking about it, or they've come over for months at a time or whatever. And the way that you describe Mexico as well, because it's interesting, you just said like it's like a failed state, and I would almost say like it's kind of it is and it isn't. Like it is in the sense that like everything's chaotic and stuff, but everything just seems to flow so well. It was really interesting. Like I was talking to my girlfriend before about when I was in the UK, there was all these strikes going on for everything, right? Like people who are listening from the UK will know this. Like in the UK right now, everyone's on strike. The rail workers are on strike, the nurses are on strike, the post office workers and the Royal Mail, they're all on strike, right? And I was talking to my girlfriend about it and saying, like everyone's on strike. And she was like, what's a strike? I had to explain to her what a strike was. She didn't understand the concept of just like people just wouldn't turn up to work. I think it seems like a very rare thing here, right? Like people, like society just seems to function. Even sometimes you're, when you're moving around and stuff, you're getting on these rickety old buses, but they get you where you need to go. You can normally find a place to stay. I don't know, just society, things seem to work, but it's chaotic. Like, and that's one of the things that's attracted me to Mexico. So I'm interested to know, first of all, if you kind of agree with that as like a description of Mexico, and also just like what attracts you to Mexico as well.
Yeah, I would pretty much agree with your assessment. So, I mean, you do have more freedom, but then from time to time, like you still can't get away 100% from the government. You have to pay some taxes or do some bureaucratic paperwork, but I think it's much less when you compare to other countries, and it's just easy living here in Mexico, despite the narco stuff. I mean, I'm still here, well, technically 12 years now, going on 13, minus my Kazakhstan stints. I've been here, and most people I know have not been killed, or are still here. And so it's a low cost of living, so you can still live reasonably. Like I find unreasonable, like in the US or other countries, the cost, the things you have to pay. And so it's a low cost of living, still the social aspect, family. I mean, again, you go to other countries, the West, basically, US, Canada, Western Europe, it's like families are all just, nobody cares. Here, families meet every week and they get along. And here Mexicans they're more humble and they're more authentic. And I feel like in the West, I experience it every time I go. People just care about, they talk about money. Here, no one talks about money. It's like, I don't care about that. I don't care about this status or materialism. And in the West, it's like, I was in Croatia this summer. I can't tell you how many strangers, this pissed me off so much, they asked me how much I make. We were at the beach in Croatia. I met an old Lithuanian lady who was married to a Croatian. We just started talking, and she asked me how much I make. Then we had a plumber come in to fix something in our house. He's like, oh, you live in Mexico. You're Croatian living in Mexico. That's fascinating. How much money you make? I'm like, what? It's just we should value each other on our character, right? Our personality and our humanity. And so, yeah, Mexico, and it's the weather's amazing, the food is amazing. You can go to the beach. You can work less. You can get by with working less. And so, yeah, and that's the other thing. If I wanted to live in the U.S., I'd have to be working like a maniac, right? Just to stay above board, where here you can kind of work part-time if you have to, take time off.
Yeah. And the thing is as well, I mean, I'm interested to know what you think to this, because, your podcast, Geopolitics Empire, I think this is a big geopolitical question. It's like when you have places like Canada, which have gone full totalitarian, like people can't own properties there, like the property prices are ridiculously high.
Literally, like a few days ago, no foreigners can now buy property in Canada for at least 2 years.
Really?
This just passed, this last week. So.
What? Because because the prices have gone too high, they're trying to curb.
I forget the exact reason, but no foreigners can buy, a Mexican, American, or whoever cannot buy property now in Canada for at least, I think, for 2 years.
That's wild. I never heard that. But, you've probably noticed as well, there is a hell of a lot of Canadians here in Mexico. And, a lot of them came here off the back of COVID. They're not going to go back they're done with it. They're done with the totalitarianism there. They're done with Trudeau being this dictator. They've started, you get your bank accounts frozen if you protest, and the other thing as well, the other thing to add to this kind of mix of things is like, it's really, really cold over there. And in the winter, they all have to heat their homes. And they're trying to do that now with hyperinflating energy prices. So I think a lot of Canadians in particular have seen this huge opportunity of just saying, okay, well, I can go to Mexico. It's this. I think it shares at least one time zone, and if not, it's maybe 1 to 2 hours out. Like you can easily kind of like work from here.
And they changed the law also, AMLO, so no more changing time zones. We get rid of the daylight savings in Mexico, which is another fantastic thing too.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. I didn't know that. Yeah, that's great. But there's so many reasons for Canadians to actually like come here, especially now everyone's working remote. How is this going to go? Because you've basically got a massive country with huge opportunity to expand. You've got rich people or generally pretty wealthy people in Canada who are trying to escape hyperinflation, who are trying to escape tyranny and all the rest of it. Like, I just cannot see how Mexico isn't going to become, if not a superpower, at least it's going to massively benefit from all of these things going on in the world right now. And not just Mexico, there's probably going to be other countries as well in similar positions, different parts of the world. But I think Mexico is almost just like got this perfect set of circumstances to move it in a really, really positive direction.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think Mexico going forward, at least economically speaking, I mean, there's a security issue. We can't downplay that. When I first came in 2010, I was not living in a gated community, and my home was broken into from 2011 to 2013. The rental was broken into 3 times while I was away. I've probably been extorted once by a transit authority. I've had a coworker kidnapped. He survived. I've had parents of students kidnapped, but they were super wealthy, businessmen. But apart from that, but going back to what you're saying about the Canadians, it's like I've met so many of these people. It's insane. Like, I don't think they're not going back. And I mean, even here, you see Starbucks and Costco's and Walmart's and you've got Netflix, and I can't believe how many in my neighborhood I see. It's all flooded with Amazon boxes. It's like it's almost like you didn't leave Canada. You've got all of the same amenities. Like I said, the other living costs are lower, and so it's a no-brainer. I mean, where I live, I don't even use energy for heating or cooling. We don't. It's that temperate. You don't really need heating or cooling. And in Lake Chapala, which is not that well, back near Guadalajara, it's got the biggest expat community of Canadians, North Americans, right? I think it's like 20 or 30,000 Canadians and U.S. citizens, and some of the people that I've met. Their kids were born here, so their kids got Mexican citizenship, and then they will get Mexican citizenship. They've come down with even the grandparents in tow, and many have bought land in all different parts of Mexico. And so, yeah, like you said, it's a one-way sort of deal. I don't really see anyone coming back. And some of the people that I know that I talk to, or I just see in the different groups, I mean, they're buying land, they're building communities, they're already in these years-long process of setting up. So it's not like you're spending all these years setting up and you're not going to hightail it out of here. I mean, unless, we never know. Tomorrow the situation might become unbearable with the narcos and we might have to leave, but,
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing that I didn't mention in that mix as well, which is probably worth mentioning, is actually the moral decline of the West as well. I think that when you see the kind of stuff that's going on, with like this like drag queen story hour and stuff like that, I mean, it would just be unthinkable here, wouldn't it? And, I think that you don't think so?
I see it slowly, maybe not so fast, but I'm shocked at how fast this stuff is coming in.
I've not seen
Mexico.
Yeah, I've not seen anything like that in Mexico, but I don't know. I guess I've not been
places like any urban area in any part of the world, urban areas are globalist. I've interviewed Gregory Copley, who's very good. He talks about this sovereign globalism and sovereignty. Rural areas are basically nationalist or sovereignty focused, and any urban area, whether it's from Ulaanbaatar, capital of Mongolia, Guadalajara or Mexico City, that's where the globalism comes in first, and you see it in like Guadalajara, Mexico City. Abortion, and then Alfaro, the head of Jalisco State, they brought in now the Mexican passports that allow you to choose gender,
I think I have heard about that.
And then you have more and more of these pride parades and things like this. And then, even I always tell this story in Colima, not far from here, there was a Christian Mexican politician, this lady, and this is just a couple years ago, all she did was post to her private Facebook quotes from the Bible. And eventually she got to that quote that says homosexuality is a sin, and she got fired. You see what I'm saying? Like, where's the tolerance there? That's her personal belief, personal Facebook, just posting a quote. She's not like saying, in some hateful manner, like some other people that I don't agree with the way they say things, but she lost her job. So you see this wokeism, whatever you want to call it. I just basically call it globalism. It encapsulates all of these things. And you're seeing it as far as Kazakhstan. When I was teaching there, I could already notice the high school youth in Kazakhstan, because it's the internet. The mind control is going through the social media, the Google, the apps, the social media, the YouTube, the blogging, and they're consuming the same, Netflix, Hollywood stuff. It's going around the world. There was a kid during the pandemic I read in one of the schools that I worked, not the same school, but another campus. He or she, I don't remember, jumped from a 9th floor building, killed themselves because I think it was a boy wanting to wear a skirt to school. And we were talking about that earlier, the conservative Kazakh culture. That will not fly with 95% of Kazakhstan, will not accept, these Western mores. And the teacher just sort of made a strict comment to the boy. And unfortunately, I wish that never happened. They killed themselves. But that just tells you how far it's reaching, out all the way to Kazakhstan, this sort of ideology, and it's slowly, working its way.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm glad you've kind of zoomed out a little bit there, because I wanted to come back out of the weeds a little bit and talk to you about the wider picture, essentially, because obviously, you've got your podcast, Geopolitics Empire, like, this is exactly what it's talking about, right? It's talking about the worldwide picture and the direction we're going and everything. So like, how would you define that for people? Let's say that there's someone out there, obviously, I'm assuming with my podcast, you're kind of somewhat preaching to the choir, but like for someone who kind of isn't clued up on this stuff, like what is going on in this geopolitical world? Like what is it that we're up against basically?
For me, it just comes, it goes again back to the Bible and the prophecy that, Book of Daniel and Revelations, it says, I just look at what the end game is, and then I just reverse engineer. And then you can see along the way the signals, the trend, right, to get there. And a lot of people talk about, World War III, Ukraine, and all these different things. But for me, it's world government, right? I was just reading yesterday, Argentina, minister from Argentina, and I think Brazil were talking about creating a common currency in Latin America, Mercosur. So I think the goal is a world government, and then everything else is to try to get us to that goal. And even before the pandemic, I remember, because we would take a taxi to work every day to the school in Kazakhstan I had an Indian colleague, another Croatian colleague, and from 2017 to 2019, we'd talk about this stuff sometimes, and I would say, yeah, there's a global dystopia coming. I literally recall telling them over and over, global dystopia. And for me, like from 2020 to 2022, that's a global dystopia. You go to any country, you were locked down, you had to have a digital permission to buy food, to buy and sell. I remember reading Italian businesses shut down. They lost their businesses because the owners of the business had to have a vaccine certificate to sell So they ended up shutting their businesses and fleeing as migrants to like Netherlands to look for work. So it's like you can't buy or sell without the mark of the beast or whatever it is. And I view basically the social credit system, the algorithm ghetto, as the mark of the beast system, where it's not so much, the point is not some physical mark, it's the system is set up, and then it's like, if you're going to submit to it or not, your decision. Like, you know, in order to go buy food, you have to take the vax. If you don't, you know, you're on your own, you'll have to scrounge for food. Or in the other case, like this, people losing their jobs because they disagree spiritually, culturally, morally with the LGBT thing. Or even climate stuff now. People are losing jobs because they question the climate narrative. The whole ESG thing, right? Companies now are going to go bankrupt because they're not following the climate. Even here in Mexico, I have friends that work in companies in Mexico that are now saying they're already getting ESG audits in Mexico. So what I feel is going on now is this drive towards world government. We saw all countries in 2020. We're already basically under world government. This is what I believe. It's not like someone's going to come and announce it. All governments are captured by these corporate interests, private intelligent military networks, and you know, this global sort of network, and they're trying, and the road to world government is regional unions. So the EU is the prototype for world government, for a technocratic, you know, dystopian, totalitarian world government system. We saw AMLO in September meet with Secretary of State Blinken. He specifically said, we want to use the EU, and I've been saying this for 10 years. I've been saying for like a decade that the EU is the blueprint for world government. And then you have AMLO a couple months ago say, we want to use the EU model to integrate Canada, USA, and Mexico. He literally said that. And then not long after that, Rafael Correa, ex-president of Ecuador, says, we want to use the EU model to create a South American Union. You know, and then you've got Putin and Nazarbayev saying, we want to create a Eurasian Union. There's already an African Union. The Council on Foreign Relations 20 years ago, they've written about a Middle Eastern Union, and I think that's what the Abraham Accords are about. So you create these supranational unions, and then that's basically your world government. That's the organizational structure that they probably think is best to manage the, it's easier to control 10 super countries than 200 little countries, right? And so that's, I feel that's the direction we're going, and it's going to be digital tyranny. They're going to set up this algorithm ghetto where, I mean, you see it everywhere, right? Going cashless, all of this QR codes and everything, and so.
Okay, so you know, I know that you had my friend Parallel Mike on your show recently. Shout out to Parallel Mike because he's
real cool guy. I like.
He's a legend. He's gonna. I'll tell you now, like Mike is gonna go really far in this new world that we're building, and I kind of want to get onto that a bit actually, just in terms of like what we are actually building here. But just what do you think? You know, we can actually be doing, because you've got people like Parallel Mike who are just like going all in on the, you know, self-sovereignty stuff, you know, like, you know, growing your own food, living off the grid, generating your own electricity and stuff. And then you've got kind of like, you know, various like different movements. But like, what do you think we actually need to do as individuals and as kind of collectives to like combat this stuff? Because there is a lot of momentum in favor of this stuff. And I think that a lot of people are kind of blind to it. And I'm not sure, I mean, personally, I have my ideas of what I think is going to bring about the world, which is all about like improving like self-sovereignty. But like, where do you stand with all that stuff? Like, what should we be doing on a day-to-day basis to fight it all?
I think I'm not of this attitude that, you know, I think we're all like soldiers, and soldiers have different roles, right? Like in the brigade, sniper and frontline and commander and logistics and medic. And it's like, I don't poo-poo someone who doesn't want to get involved politically. Like, I think we should be going full on parallel society running for the hills, or at least having that set up. And so if there are people so inclined, we need more that, you know, need to become more like activists if someone wants to run for some office or push back against the government, we need to be doing that. We need to be doing information warfare, podcasting, whatever, building parallel societies. So all of that, but I don't think it's like everyone should be doing that. I'm not going to say, if someone doesn't want to deal with politics, I'm not going to say, you're bad, or you should be involved, politically active, or so. That's sort of how I feel that we need to be building the parallel systems. I kind of view all of this as inevitable. Again, back to my biblical view that this can't stop. Well, the thing is that we don't know when it will happen. Like I had the conversation with Pastor Artur Pawlowski, the famous Canadian pastor that shouted at the Nazi. You remember?
I remember.
They're coming in. He was like,
yeah.
Nazis, communists, get out! And Patrick Wood of Technocracy, I've interviewed him, and he's also Christian. And they both had the same view, which I share, that if you look at historically, Satan or the devil, which I believe is a real, specific entity. A lot of people attribute it to some vague, sort of ambiguous evil. No, I think there's a real, Satan, Lucifer, who's going around manipulating things, and he wants this world government. And if you look at the trajectory of all of history, over time, he has kept trying to create a world government. Look at Roman Empire. In the Roman Empire, I was shocked during the pandemic to discover there were certificates, like vaccine passports. They had certificates where citizens had to offer animal sacrifice to pagan gods. And if you didn't have this certificate, you'd be like fined or jailed or killed or something. So Christians back then would have to ask their friends to get them fake pagan worship. You see what I'm saying?
That is amazing. I've never heard that before.
In the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church also had you can't buy or sell unless you submit it to the Catholic Church thing.
Okay, but then if this has happened before, it sounds like this is something that's cyclical, right? That maybe.
Well, I don't view it more. Well, in one way, cyclical, but I view it as it's a permanent trajectory where at one point it will happen.
Right. Okay.
So it's like. It's waves that every time get bigger and bigger. It's not like it's cyclical where it happens and then it's not going to happen again. Each wave is bigger. Then you have Nazi Germany. They had the Nazi health passes, right? And I think Hitler and the Nazis were this occult. They were going to try to take over the planet, and they failed. And that's what Pastor Pawlowski and Patrick Wood said, that we don't know if this time it's it or they're going to fail, and then we'll have another couple of decades of freedom. So I think eventually it's going to happen. This could be it. But I think our duty is to resist evil as best as we can, but not be obsessed about it. Try to live a balanced life, enjoying life, being happy, fighting tyranny. You know what I'm saying? Like in all aspects, being well-rounded. So that's kind of my view, and what others like Pawlowski and Patrick Wood say, that it's coming in waves, but every time it's more massive. Like I interviewed Mark Faber, the millionaire investor, Swiss investor who lives in Thailand, I think in 2020, and he's like, he studies history, he's a historian. He says, from a secular point, he said that in all of history, we've never seen what happened during the pandemic in all of history, even secularly speaking. That should tell you something. Where all countries shut down, that's unprecedented,
Yeah, totally. But I agree with that, what you were saying about, that we still got to just like live our lives and all this kind of stuff. Like, I do think, and I'm hoping that this year, because I think that this community has been a little bit doomer over the past couple of years, to be honest. Like, it's good that people are getting active and stuff, but there is a lot of just like, oh, everything's going, there needs to be a sense of humor about this stuff. We need to actually I think that there was this thing, I remember when Hitler was in power and stuff. Well, not that I remember, I was living during those times, but people have said since that, like, during those times, there was almost like that people used to kind of mock Hitler almost as if like he's this stupid figure. And then it was like they kind of lost that at some point, and then it became like, oh, it's all so serious. I think we need to like mock these people, and we need to mock what's going on, and we need to actually like be positive, build stuff up, but build it from a good place. I was talking to Darren Denslow on TNT Radio the other day. TNT. By the way, I want to talk to you about TNT in a minute, because I love what you guys are doing. But I was talking to him, and I said, like, what we've got to be doing is like raising our consciousness, because we have to kind of bring about. I think the way that we win is not, it's not necessarily that everyone's got to go, full on like, okay, we've got to all have our own little off-grid whatever houses and do everything. Like, that's good, and I do think that can really insulate you, but I don't think it's going to win long term, because most people are not going to ultimately live that life. I do think that that's a bit of a step too far. We've kind of moved out of that world, but I think that what is necessary from everyone, like, to actually kind of like win this thing, is we've got to win the spiritual war. Like, that's something that we can actually do, that everyone can do, is that you kind of like keep a good spirit, like interact with other people, that we kind of like keep like a lot of love between people in our community. And then we show through our actions, we bring over people from that kind of other side, just by the nature of, what we're projecting out into the world. Right. And, again, not to kind of repeat myself too much on Darren's show, but just to kind of briefly use the parallel that I drew there, is like, you see people who are, what they want is that everyone is, sitting at home, wearing a mask, and, living in the metaverse and eating bugs, right? Now, you do that by fear, right? So how do you create the opposite? Well, in my view, like, you do it through love. You do it through love, and you do it through humor, and you do it through good emotion stuff. And if you give those things to those people, they don't want to sit and live in a metaverse and wear a mask and, be afraid of everything. They actually can, that energy, I think, is more infectious, right? So, like, I think that we need to, and something that I'm going to certainly like try to improve on myself, because I, just like anyone else, have a habit of kind of going down these doomer routes. But I think that we need to actually kind of raise our consciousness, and that through that, the people on the other side, and I don't say that kind of as a pejorative, but just people who don't necessarily share all our ideas, they will actually kind of say, these people are living well. I was told that I was going to die if I didn't take the vaccine. I was told I was going to die if I didn't wear the mask. I was told that, I needed to eat the bugs to save the planet or whatever. And when they see that people are living outside of that, and they're kind of extricating themselves to the system to some degree, if not physically, then at least spiritually, I think that's how we kind of, we bring people across, and then we build a new world, like, I just want to get your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. I mean, I've always been a prankster, a joker. Like, I'm not kidding, everyone can testify this. At my workplace at the Tecnimont today, as a teacher, the best office. Like, it was decorated with all of these conspiracy posters, and I had pranks like garlic Tic Tacs. You take the Tic Tac, after a minute, it's garlic, or shock pens, staplers, exploding pens. Like, I just love playing jokes. And my approach is, I don't know where it comes from, whether it's, they say from the Balkans, us former Yugoslavs, Croats, as well as Serbs and Bosnians, that we have this dark Balkan humor, because, and it's the same with other cultures that have gone through tough times where things are so bleak. I mean, you can either laugh or you cry. So you just start making jokes. And so, but I also, for me, it's important, I'm able to look at the darkest things that are going on now, because I also studied history. I watch videos, war videos and stuff that are gory. I made it a point to show to students when we talked about the Middle East wars, foreign policy, and there's this clip of Afghan soldiers where they a soldier steps on a mine, and his eyes are blown out, his legs blown out. He's still alive, but it's brutal. I'm like, you need to see this. Some could not watch. I would give them a warning. I'm like, so I feel like I'm able to look at the darkest black pill hole, but still retain my sanity. Like, it doesn't do anything to me when like you're saying, this flip side, and my joy or laughter. There are people who look at that, and then that's all they think about, and they're not happy otherwise. And I see some people, like on my Telegram, which I think is half filled with like Fed bots. They're just upset. It was just angering me this week. It was like a flood, so unorganic that they were just obsessed with the Jewish people. And I'm not. Like, I don't think Jews rule the world. I think it's, again, Satan, and then all of these different other groups, Bilderbergs, Trilaterals, Masons, and you've got a Saudi lobby, you have an Israeli lobby, you have all kinds of lobbies. So, but so many people are just obsessing over 5G is going to get us, and this or that, and it's like, that's not healthy. And I can look at this stuff, and I'm the kind of person where if I'm taken to the gulags, I'll be laughing on my way. You see what I'm saying? Like having this attitude, they can't take that away from you, your laughter, your joy, your faith, or whatever. They can physically do that. They can impoverish you, close your bank accounts, but they can't. I'll be laughing on my way to the gulag. And I feel like that encapsulates what you're talking about, and I think that's how we should be. And yeah, have this balance, because there's too many people just doom and glooming. Like, I know some people who are just buying land in Mexico and just freaking out. They're like, what if the government comes and takes my land? I'm like, well, what are you going to do? Like when in Nazi times, when they came to take the Jews or whoever, that's it. That's the end of the road. Make peace with that. You know, and at some point there's going to be something there where there's nothing you can do.
Yes, and I think that this is why you need to have some kind of spirituality, whether that's, you know, a religious spirituality, or whether it's just a kind of personal belief or some kind of understanding that you have with the essence of your own humanity. I think at some point you have to not be afraid of death, especially when you've done everything within, you know, the realms of your capacity to escape, you know, whatever bad thing can happen to you, right? You know, like nobody wants to go to the gulag. You know, we're all trying to kind of like create the world we want to live in. But if you get to the end of the road, you kind of, at some point, you got to say, well, you know, we're all here in this infinite, crazy world that we can't really fully comprehend. And whether you think you're going to go and be with God, or whether you think you're going to go and rejoin, become stardust, or whatever it is, right? Like whatever your belief is, you know, this isn't it, right? Like I think that you've got to have some kind of a sense of wonder about the nature of life, because if you just think this is what everything is, and I think that that's actually part of the darkness, in my view, like part of why people get into these dark spirals is because they think that this material world is all there is. You have to have something more than that, right?
Transcendental.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Man, this has been such an awesome conversation. Before we sign it off, tell us what's going on with TNT, because, you know, I genuinely think TNT is awesome. Like, I love what you guys are doing. I've got like really, really like high hopes for where everything's going there. I think that it's like super different, and, you know, got, you know, a lot of respect for what's going on. Tell us about that. Tell us about like, you know, your own podcast, and yeah, like what's coming up for you right now. Yeah,
like I mean, I basically, the way my podcast started was basically like 2012, I think, around there, where I was Skyping in people that I wanted to talk to, like the Paul Craig Roberts and Lord Christopher Monckton's, and I called that the Dissident Thinker channel. It's still up. And then I made a real podcast like 2015, 16, Geopolitics Empire. So I was just moonlighting, working full time, and I was just moonlighting at the podcast. And so I'm trying to really build up the podcast now. It's a struggle, you know. You got life and kids and TNT, and so yeah, you can visit Geopolitics and Empire, the website geopoliticsandempire.com. On the Google search, I'm blacklisted, so I'm doing that. And then TNT, basically, yeah, I was Rick Moon's guest back in March of, I guess, last year now. I got to get used to saying last year, March 2022. And then like a week later, I got hired to do a TNT show by Mike Ryan. And so since March, I've been doing TNT, and kind of like you, I feel like I'm part of the experiment. I take it day by day. It's evolving. I love what they're doing. I think the administration, Mike and the crew, they're adapting, they're fluid, they're seeing what works. If something doesn't work, they stop it, they adjust, which I think is the best way to go about it. They keep growing, and so, you know, finance is important for everything. For podcasts like, you know, Staying Free or mine or TNT, it's really hard to work against the censorship, and people expect free content. And like, I've got some sponsors, which has helped me out a lot. And I put in a minute or two of ads in my podcast, and there's people that complain. I'm like, well, I'm giving you an hour with awesome guests for free, and you're complaining about just having to sit through a minute of ads. Like, well, I don't need you. I'm sorry, but that's like, you know how much hard work? I mean, you were telling me it's hard work producing this content for free, and I can't live off the air, right? And so, yeah, but TNT, I kind of see them, they're becoming like avant-garde, right? Almost like a sort of an InfoWars type system, a little more nuanced than something like InfoWars, but Alex Jones has been on TNT Radio, right? It's just,
has he? That's cool.
Yeah, and so all of the big names everyone knows of has been on, all of the McCulloughs and Robert Malones and Steve Kirsch's and all sorts of people have been on, and so, yeah.
Yeah, I think with TNT, it's almost like the sum sometimes is greater than the parts in a way, like with TNT, there's so many like really awesome hosts, like all in one place, and you just kind of got this thing that's like a crucible. And, like everyone individually, it's got podcasters. Obviously, like Rick was not a podcaster like before, but, you were, and Warfare, he had a podcast. I think there's a few other, I guess you got
Senator Malcolm Roberts from Australia. And it's funny, I interviewed him in 2021, way before I knew TNT existed. I had him on. He's like the Australian Ron Paul. I said that in the interview to him. That got taken off of YouTube, but he's got his own, I think, once a week show on Saturday on TNT Radio. He's openly in Australia in the Parliament speaking against digital ID and Great Reset and WEF and all of that. And so, yeah, you've got Joe Hoff from Gateway Pundit, who's big, and the roster, it changes from time to time. So.
Yeah. It's great. I think, it's really tapped into this community as well. That's one of the main things is that, TNT, like I'm going on there and I'm listening to people who I know through Twitter and I know through, the freedom community and going to protests and all kinds of stuff. Like it's genuinely tapped into, it feels organic, it feels grassroots. And yeah, so, I've got high hopes for sure. And, I definitely recommend that people check out your podcast as well, Geopolitics Empire. You've had some really, really cool guests on there and great conversations and stuff. It's definitely like become one of my favorite podcasts. So I appreciate you coming on here to talk with me.
And my next Geopolitics Empire guest is going to be pretty cool. It's going to be maybe him.
Oh yeah. That's worth mentioning. So we're actually about to basically swap places here, and I'm about to go on Hrvoje's podcast. So we're gonna do another conversation there. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this one. Obviously, trying something completely different with this in-person conversation. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. If you have any last words, but otherwise, let's close this one down.
Last words. Well, we're gonna enjoy later maybe some tacos and Viva Mexico. That's all I can say.